Catherine was called to full-time grassroots activism in 2008 when she says she could no longer watch silently as the government made decisions that stood in contrast to America's founding principles. With her family's support, she founded True the Vote, a citizen-led effort to restore honor and integrity to our electoral system. True the Vote is currently working with 30 states, with an emphasis in select states and counties known to have problematic election processes. I bet you're here in Minnesota too, aren't you? After she founded True the Vote, Catherine became the target of a number of hostile government agencies, including the IRS and the FBI. What did she do to merit being targeted by government agencies? She believed that government was not being held accountable, that it abuses the rights of American citizens, and that voter integrity was and is a serious issue facing our country. For this, she became a target. The IRS asked hundreds and hundreds of intrusive questions, including requesting every Facebook post and tweet she had ever written. She received questions about her family, whether she'd ever run for political office, and which organization she had spoken to, among many other intrusive questions. Through it all, Catherine has come out stronger than ever and continues to have a powerful impact. She's spoken to hundreds of grassroots activists and has testified before Congress about her treatment at the hands of the IRS and other agencies. Her testimony shed tremendous light on the continuing scandals surrounding the IRS targeting of conservatives and conservative organizations. In 2011, the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, presented Catherine and True the Vote with the Ronald Reagan Freedom Award in recognition of her groundbreaking work. In 2012, she was named one of Politico's 50 to watch, given to 50 new and rising talents on the national political scene. And last year, the Clare Luce Policy Institute awarded Catherine our Woman of Exceptional Courage Award as she stood tall under continuing government harassment. Despite attempts by the government to intimidate and silence her, Catherine continues to have a powerful impact. Please join me now in welcoming Catherine Engelbrecht.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Thanks to Clare Boothe Luce for having me. And thanks to all of you guys for coming. So how's the conference going so far? Good? I have an interesting story to share with you about St. Louis. Quick show of hands, how many of you are from St. Louis? You're, yay! Holla! This is my second time to St. Louis. My first time was 9/11. I was here at the time. I was running an oil. My former husband and I had an oil and gas company, and we had bought some software and needed to learn how to work the software, and so I was sent to learn it. And was in a meeting. Came out of the meeting, and there were televisions all over the banquet floor or the banquet area, and they were showing the planes hitting the buildings. And of course, I'd been in a meeting. I had no sort of context clues other than these televisions were everywhere. And I thought, is this really what we've come to in America, that things are so commercial that they would actually like promote a movie right here while we're having these conferences? Because it seemed so surreal that this was actually some kind of a movie promotion. That's where my mind, the only thing my mind could conceive of. I was here for a week. I almost said I was stuck here for a week, but I wouldn't say I was stuck. I don't think you can be stuck when you have the Mall of America in your backyard, but I was here for a week. I was 31 years old. For those of you that are doing fast math, that means I'm 39. I've been 39 for some time now. No, I'm kidding. I'm not 39 either. But what that taught me, and of course that's, as you heard Michelle say, before politics was even a glimmer in my eye. What it taught me was that we really are all an awful lot more alike than we are different. And that to our core, there's some testy moments among us, but for the most part, we're good people who want to do the right thing. And I think that was never clearer as it was maybe on 9/12, when those of us stuck in the hotel room would pack up every day and go to the airport thinking maybe that day the planes would leave. And if you recall what was going on there during those times, if you were here, and as nearly as I can recall it, one of the bombers, one of the pilots, had trained here, and so they shut down the airports for a particularly long time. So we would pack up and we'd go to the airport thinking that today was the day, and then would turn out not to be the day, and we'd all rush back to try to get our rooms again, and became sort of this little squadron of sort of American nomads trying to find our way back to a hotel every at the close of every day at the airport. When I reflect on the things that have happened in the past few years to me, to my family, I take great comfort in the feelings that I had on 9/12 and shortly thereafter, because that's who we really are. And I think in many ways in these last few years we've lost touch with that. I think that we've been made to believe, many of us, that we're something that we're not. It's one of Saul Alinsky's rules, right? You repeat a lie often enough and it will become the truth. And we've had an awful lot of lies repeated an awful lot of times in these last few years. So I believe, I was sitting next to Nicole at dinner and talking about what it means for the youths of America, for the generations of young people that are now coming up and are going to be faced with some of the problems that are being set in under the watch of this current administration, and many of those problems are of a scale that they are going to be very difficult to extract ourselves from. What is it that you're called to do? And I submit to you that we find ourselves in a time of history and in a time of miracles. We are at a point where we are going to tip forwards into chaos or backwards into apathy, and it's to you in the room who have been called. Make no mistake, you've been called. You could have been born at any time. God who birthed the universe could have put you here on this planet at any time, but he's chosen to put you here now, and maybe he's chosen to put you here just to be at this conference this weekend, because once you are exposed to truth, you're then accountable for it. And to be this light now into your generation is a call unlike I've experienced in my generation. It's and you're up to it. So many people know my story now because of the targeting that went on as a result of my starting True the Vote. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about True the Vote and how it started, a little bit about how my story weaves into that, and then I'd like to talk about ways that you can lead in your community, maybe with the same response that I got, maybe with your fair share of targeting too, but to encourage you that there are no other options. You have to stand for what you believe in. If you don't, then what's the point? If you don't stand when it's hard taking that stand, then are you free? If you run, are you free? I didn't think so, and that's why I've chosen to stand, arguably under situations that have put me to the test. But they are, I think, ladies and gentlemen, they are essential in these times to refining our character, because we are in for quite a challenge in the months ahead, particularly as we race up to 2016. How did True the Vote start? We were a very small group of people who started, we met each other quite by accident going to a rally Tea Party rally, which I had never been a part of anything like that, remotely related. I went and bought glitter paint and poster board and made a poster that said, "Cut the pork," which I thought was scathingly brilliant at the time. And met people that were holding similar signs, and we would kind of look at each other saying, "Have you ever done this before? No. Have you ever done this before? No. What are we going to do next? I don't know. What do you think we should do? I don't know." And nobody really knew. From that was sort of this discussion of, well, what can we do? We can't hold signs forever. You know, we got to evolve into something. Well, we had heard that there was a need for people to go to work at the polls, and we thought, well, we can do that. That'll be a short gig. One-day gig, we'll check that off our good citizens list, we'll move on to something else. What we saw at the polls, though, was really the beginnings of True the Vote, because we saw problems. We saw everything ranging from just process-related problems, just quick show of hands, how many of you have worked in the polls? All right, just keep your hands up for a second, because if you're sitting next to someone who doesn't have their hands up, ball your fist up and just hit them right in the shoulder. I'm slightly kidding. We really do have a huge shortage of the necessary number of poll workers in this country. And what happens when you don't have people, when you don't have the eyes and the ears of the Republic showing up, is you become states like we are seeing in Washington and in Oregon and in California. Minnesota's not that far gone. You can still reel it back in, but I'll tell you, there are some states that have gone all mail-in, all electronic. There's no more election day, there's election month. It's just this sort of big unclear about when it starts and stops and how you even participate, and the human element is removed, and once that is done, you don't get it back. Once you decommission the polling structure, you don't get it back. And so it's incredibly important that now, when we are under attack, we stand strong in the polls, because observation changes things. And that's what we found out in 2009, which was the first year that we got out and really watched the process. We saw just general confusion of the process, but we also saw election fraud. We saw people who would come in with more than one registration card and present one and be told, "Oh, I'm sorry, you've already voted in an early election." And then they would present another one and be told, "Oh, okay, you can vote." I think in training, I think they said that was illegal. I don't think you're supposed to be able to do that. But it happens just in a flash. And it didn't happen, but please don't hear me suggest that it happened just time and time and time and time again. Thankfully, it didn't. But it happened enough that it made you take a step back and say, well, if this happens when people are watching, what happens when no one's around? Well, that was where True the Vote got its start. We thought, you know, what we should do is we should start looking at the accuracy of the voter rolls. We should start researching the accuracy of the polls themselves. Then we should make sure that every polling place is fully staffed. Then we should make sure that everything we learn, all the little lessons that we learn along the way, we take those, and when our state legislature comes back into session, we take what we know to be true, common sense reform, and we encourage to the passage of those kinds of laws for the benefit of the state of Texas. Well, that seems like a pretty simple thing to do, you know? I mean, I wasn't part of the Republican Party when I did this. I was conservative, to be sure, but my thought was, how could anybody, this should be a great, unifying adventure. True the Vote should be something that we should all be able to get along about. We should all be able to work with one another. How can you be against an effort like, if you're against True the Vote, what are you for? And so now people ask, do you work with both parties? And I have to answer honestly, well, the Republican Party has been very open to working with volunteers that we've trained, very open to reading through the research that we've provided. The Democrat Party has sued us. So we do work with both parties, just slightly differently. So when things got rolling, and time is too short tonight to tell you, because it is quite a story. We did our very first research project. After we went and worked at the polls, we thought, you know what, we're going to take a closer look at the voter rolls, and we're going to see if in fact there are dead people registered, if people are registered more than once, or if that's just an urban legend. Well, we did find problems. We turned those problems over to the county. The county held a press conference, and 3 days later, quite by accident, I'm sure, the group that we outed for bloating Harris County voter rolls, third largest voting bloc in the nation, so a very consequential part of our country. Not that any part is inconsequential, but there are just a lot of votes there. The group that we called on the carpet about it called a press conference to try to save their reputation, and that morning, all of Harris County's election equipment was burnt to the ground. 10,000 machines, $30 million worth of collateral equipment. At the time, I was at a Glenn Beck rally in Washington, had no idea what was going on. My phone was just going nuts. Receiving these texts about, you know, all the equipment's burning. I mean, it was so surreal. Well, I got a number that I came through that I didn't realize or recognize, and I let it go to voicemail, and later on I checked it, and it was the editor of the Huffington Post, and I thought, oh, this isn't going to be good. I'd never had any, I'd never had any experience with the press at all. I wasn't looking for any, attention. We had done our research and we had turned it over and we were going to move on to the next thing. Well, they had found out that we were the ones that turned over the research, and they called us, us being True the Vote, the largest voter suppression effort ever in the history of the country. Wow. And it was like a progressive dog whistle had sounded. And all of a sudden, all the groups, and there are 80 some odd groups that stand in direct opposition to everything we do. I call them anti-voter rights groups. Those groups came after us with a vengeance. Just to give you an idea of scale, in 2012, those 83 groups spent $1.69 billion to convince Americans that you don't really want voter ID, and you don't really want only citizens voting, and you don't really want citizens to be engaged in the polls. That's the message that those front groups trumpet time and time and time again. Even though we look at each other and say, what's the big deal with ID? You have to use ID for everything. Why wouldn't you want to show it at the poll? What's the big deal? But yet the leaders of these groups who portend to represent the voices of millions call you every name in the book because you think it's a realistic ask to ask people to prove they are who they say they are when they cast their vote. So once all this has happened now, all of a sudden, after the flames die down, I guess no pun intended, that's awful, but it's true. After all that was kind of done, the FBI started showing up. It was the domestic, we found that later through FOIAs. At the time, we didn't know who they were, but they were the domestic terrorism unit. Through FOIAs later, we also found out that they were classifying their visits to us as neighborhood outreach. Oh, isn't that nice? Oh, thank you, FBI, for coming and hanging out with us so many times. That was so great of you. We feel so neighborly. Then the IRS showed up. They audited us. Now, we had never been audited before. We had a small, as I said earlier, oil and gas company. It had never been audited. Sometimes you draw the short straw, so we thought, okay, that, it happens. We are audited for 2 years with our corporate taxes. Then we were audited for 2 years with our personal taxes. We got a refund, so the joke's on them, but we still had to go through the process, and it wasn't even a normal. My dad's a CPA. My dad was very quick to tell me that this is not a normal audit. When the auditors want to drive out to the family farm, which is out of town, and they want to count the bales of hay and look at the new fence line, and they want to dig in and spend days and days and days on a return where you get a refund. I mean, there's no big mystery about what our return said, but they needed to drag us through the paces, and they did. Then OSHA showed up for a surprise inspection while no owner of the company was there, and they demanded to talk to the employees, and that turned into another interesting episode. Then Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms showed up twice. When they show up, what happens is, and we have a license to make gun parts. Now, never had made them, but just because we had the license, it does give them the authority to come and check your papers if they want to once a year, which is fine. They do that in about 20% of the cases of the people that hold these kinds of licenses. We were chosen with no business, which is something that's well known by the Bureau, because you have to file these reports that show how much business you're doing. So a company that's doing no business, they show up and do audits 2 years in a row, and when they show up, that means that they ask you to open up your safes. If you have any firearms, they make you take them out. They take the serial numbers. They go through all your files. It is taken one at a time. It's bad enough. But to this point, I've been through, in the last 3 years, 23 either audits or investigations or points of inquiry. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, True the Vote had filed for nonprofit status so that we could raise money and give people tax deductions for their contributions to us. In retrospect, that had to be one of the catalysts that put us on the map, put us on the radar for this much greater government. You know, I think about it like this. I think about like the crime shows you watch that have the walls of cork and then all of these sort of copied pieces of paper and the pins that are sort of stuck together with string, and they say this is connected to this, and then that was connected here, and that. I think that's what is like happening in the Oval Office. They decide who they want to get, and then they figure out what agency can get to them. Because we're not talking about, even though the headlines are only the IRS for the most part, I'm telling you, there is collusion. There's collusion among agencies. There's collusion among the branches of government. We have emails that show Congressman Elijah Cummings, who's a congressman from Maryland, talking to Lois Lerner about our tax returns. We have that. It hasn't found its way to sort of percolate through to the awareness that we have as a country about what happened with the IRS, but I'm telling you, it is about more than the IRS. This is a much bigger play, which begs the question, what could we have been so close to that we had to be stopped at all costs? And I think that the answer is, for 40-some years since the birth of the civil rights movement, for the wonderful and necessary achievements that happened in our country during those years, the slide towards something that no longer represents the voice of the people is what is dominating the airwaves today. True the Vote is the only pro-liberty group that stands with focus to encourage people to work in the polls, to encourage states to adopt photo voter identification measures. And we stand against all the many groups who are trying to convince other groups that they can't speak for themselves, that they must have government in their lives, directing their every move. And we are dangerously close to finding ourselves as a country in a place where we don't have eye-to-eye contact in the polls any longer, where everything is online, where everything is controlled by the federal government, where there isn't a choice of whether or not you want to register. There's universal voter registration. If you exist anywhere on a voter roll, you're automatically registered. Taken out of context, those things might seem nice. But they are far too easy to manipulate in a system where we've been told that securities and sanctities of the vote just simply don't matter. Take now what's happening with the Edict of Executive Amnesty. We know as a practical matter that our states do not have the capacity to keep separate citizen and non-citizen status in their voter files. Now, some of them do. Let me rephrase that. Some of them do. Some of them don't. And so even though they're going through the driver's license office and getting a license that may say that they are not American citizens, for the voter rolls, where they are also being listed, there is no way to tell the difference. That's also a story you're not going to hear in the headlines, but it's very true. It's all hands on deck time. And it falls to you guys. You're the ones that are now going to carry the torch and make sure that in those polls there is adequate representation. Make sure that when you have an opportunity to talk about voter registration, that you encourage photo voter identification, that you encourage the hands-on aspect of it. Because if we don't, we'll lose it. My son is he's on the swim team, and his coach says, he goes to a small Christian high school, and his coach says, be mindful of how you are out in public, because sometimes you're the only Bible people are going to see. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you, be mindful of how you are in public, because sometimes you're the only Statue of Liberty that people are going to see. And you got to stand, because if you don't, we're going to lose it. That's where we are. It is totally savable, but it's on us. Make no mistake. You're here for a reason. May not be, maybe election integrity isn't your thing. Maybe immigration isn't your thing. Healthcare is not your thing. Whatever. There's some reason. There's something inside of you that has compelled you to be here. Whatever that is, take it. Whatever that means. Maybe it's talking to your family. Maybe it's talking to a neighbor. Maybe it's starting an organization. Do it. Act on it. Go with it. Let it be. That's how we change this. Don't enter into that place of self-talk where you think, you know what, that was a great dinner and rest of it didn't really apply. It does apply. Now's the time, ladies and gentlemen. Now is the time for such a time. I've been through a lot. I'd go through it all again to stand before you and tell you that I have tremendous hope about the future of this country. But it is on us. So I would love to take any of the questions that you might have and appreciate very much your attention. Thanks. Any questions? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
What's your Twitter handle? Because I've been trying to tweet all your wisdom and I can't find you.
I don't tweet. I know. I think we're hashtag TTV. I think at True the Vote. See, there you have it. I bet. Which is the funny thing when the IRS says we want every tweet you've ever tweeted and every Facebook posting you've ever posted. I'm like, you got me. I don't do that. So, but thank you. Just write it in the bathroom on the walls. That'll be sufficient. Yes, ma'am, up front.
It was so disheartening, I guess, to hear how your love of country after 9/11, how much pride you had in that, and then to have that country just attack you and put you through the ringer. How, through that time of what must have felt like betrayal, did you keep motivated and?
That's a great question. I never felt like it was the country attacking me. There are some people in positions of power now that are dangerously close to being at a place where they can convince us that we're victims. There are more of us than there are them. That's the balance, and that's what we have to keep in mind. This is just a season that we're in, and we're going to fight our way out of it. So, I have tremendous hope still and always in the spirit of Americans. That's the real heart of the country. The rest of this is just something that we need to work our way through.
As someone who has worked the polls in the primaries, who worked alongside people who I wouldn't trust to flip my burgers, let alone, watch people do this civic duty, how do you, in True to Vote, handle people like that who work the polls? Simply in the state of Kentucky, you get paid to work the polls, and people do it just like it's a welfare state that they can take in. How do you, in True to Vote, deal with people like that who are lackadaisical enough that they're working the polls is actually detrimental?
So you bring up a great point. In many states, in most states, you do get paid to work at the polls, and it's a gig for a lot of folks that need to work. And so oftentimes you find people that they're on the go-to list to work at the elections, and they've been doing it for years and years and years and years. I actually read an article once that said the average age of an American poll worker is 72. I don't think that that's right, but it's up there. It's up there. I'll go back to my opening comments that we're a lot more alike than we are different. And when people know better, they do better. And because many times they've been in these positions for so long and they really haven't seen anybody that really cares, it's just kind of easy to backslide. And I think the balance, though, comes when you do have folks that are newly trained and, you're raring to go, to make sure you understand that you're meeting a fellow American at the poll whose vote counts every much as yours does, every bit as much. And, take this hear this with the heart with which it is intended. Sometimes as a conservative movement, we don't necessarily exude love, And there's a whole lot of love that needs to be happening. And especially with folks that may not be as receptive to a message of liberty because of that. We're a lot more alike than we are different. So just bear that in mind, and things tend to work out.
Thank you, Catherine. God bless you for all you're doing.
Thanks.
I've had the pleasure to work here in Minnesota with election integrity. It was started by our National Committee woman.
Where being frankened is a verb. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a place where most Minnesotans think that we can't have election fraud. We're too good for that. And yet we've elected Dayton, and we've elected Franken, and we re-elected them. How's that going to happen? How do we get voter ID?
Well, it's not easy. But what we know, particularly because you ask a lot of questions, they're all good questions. The voter ID question is an interesting one because 85% of America wants photo voter identification, across all boundaries of Americans. It just makes sense. That is something that has to find its way through your state legislature at the right time and in the right way, but it requires constant vigilance and advocacy on the part of citizens to see that through. As to what happened in some of those past elections, there's the movie, the show Survivor, and the saying of the show Survivor is outwit, outplay, outlast. Well, in the instances that you described, a lot of that has to do with outwitting, outplay, and outlasting. They just flat. If we're going to count them one more time, and now we found another box in somebody's trunk, and now we're going to count them one more time. One of the things I think we forget when the chips are down in elections is that the opposition really does play to win. They play to win. They will count every vote as many times as it takes if you let them. They typically have deep benches of attorneys. We may have an attorney that's driving around the area. When the scene starts to crumble, like it did in Coleman and Franken, and the recounts continued, at some point somebody should have said, time out, what are we doing here? But the Republican Party didn't, because they thought, well, no, we're counting. We're all counting, and this will just be fine. And that's not how they play. You've got to understand, Sun Tzu, Art of War, understand your enemy. You got to understand your enemy. And in my opinion, although there are no easy fixes, the surest answer is full-on citizen engagement. Observation changes things. You are less inclined to misbehave if you know that your fellow Americans are standing there saying, no, we're going to run this one by the books. And when we close the poll boxes at night, I'm going to go ahead and follow whoever takes that box to the central collection area in the county. And I'm going to make sure that their the box serial numbers stay on. And those are the kinds of things you have to do to kind of fight your way out of the corner that sometimes we find ourselves in. And it's not pretty, and it's granular, and it's tedious. But that's it. That's it. It's all hands on deck.
My name's Janet Byhofer, and I ran election operations for the Republican Party of Minnesota starting in 2006, 8, and 10. I am now on RNC, so you know I cannot do that anymore. Everything Catherine says, although the particular nuances may be different, everything she says is true. Norm Coleman won the 2008 election, and it was stolen from him. Some of it was attorney faults. I could give you all kinds of stuff on that. But what we have to understand is the more bodies that we have inside the precincts on election day makes a difference. For those of you in Minnesota, 2012, after 5 cycles of my banging the doggone drum for our party to wake up, Minneapolis, which has 330 some odd precincts, for the first time in anyone's memory, had a legitimate Republican election judge in each precinct. That is pathetic. Those precincts have 2,000 to 3,000 voters per precinct. They will have 8 to 12 election judges. And we get 1 per precinct. But I will tell you this much. We don't need parity. We need 1/3, because it scares the living daylights out of the Democrats when there is a Republican judge that says, you cannot do that. That is against the law. And for you youngsters who are new in this, you get you and your friends and your college co-workers, co-students, and for anyone from Minnesota, you drag every single body you can to work on election day, because the Democrats have no backbone. And when you can stand in a precinct and say, we will follow the law, they cave. And we had Minneapolis head election judges say, we don't have ID here. We tried, we failed. And what we have done, yours truly is done. I used to stand at conventions and say, this piece of paper here, this piece of plastic that you all have, I'm not allowed to tell you to use it at the precincts. So I'm not going to tell you to take this piece of plastic and stand in line and hold it in the precinct. That piece of plastic is your ID. And we have thousands of conservatives now standing in line with their driver's licenses in their hands and giving it to the election judge who says you don't need an ID, and your answer is, make sure you spell my name right, even if it's Smith. And we have to push back. Everything she has done with Through the Vote is incredibly commendable, and she has gone through hell personally to try to protect what we have in this nation, and if we lose it, guys, there is no place to go. So if you take nothing else out of what Catherine has said, you get you, your friends, your church people, your neighbors, and get them to be election judges, because the Democrats don't like this, and 1 out of 3 is enough. Thank you.
You know, there are an awful lot of, first of all, thank you for backing me up, because it's true. There's an awful lot of good bullet points you offered just then. We absolutely encourage, when you go to volunteer in the polls, don't go alone. Not that it's going to be, a terribly horrific experience, not that. But if you do see something, we've learned the hard way that if it's just you and you see something in the nanosecond, and you look at your counterpart who's up on the opposite political party and say, "Did you see that?" Guess what they're going to say? No. So you bring 1, if not 2 people. Our preference was always go in with teams of 3. That way you have people there to back you up. When I got into all of this, one of the first things that I stumbled across was a Pew Research report that talked, the title, I think the subhead was about the 2008 elections, and the subhead was, what would happen if we had an election and everyone showed up? And then the report went on to talk about how the system would just implode. That's, I submit, by design. You pull the citizens out, you overwhelm the process. When it cracks in half, the feds have to come in and take control. It's a manufactured crisis, and we're seeing it on many fronts now, and it's converging in our elections for what promises to be a perfect storm. Everything starts in the polls. Corruption, when not stopped at the polls, runs to the highest offices in the land. That's why it's essential now. And I'll tell you something else about, if you think about, well, I don't know, my family's not into politics, or my friends are not going to. Here's what I've learned over the years. People may not want to get involved because they particularly care about a candidate, or because they really care about a political party. But it is in our DNA to stand and defend our right to vote. And that's what you're doing. You're defending your right, you're defending your neighbor's right, you're defending the other parties on the ticket's right. That's what we need in this country. We just need, let the best man or woman win, just let it be fair. So it doesn't have to be a political thing. It's not about politics, it's about principle. Anybody else? Oh.
I know I already asked your Twitter handle, but I have one more thing. I live in a tiny beach village just north of Tijuana, Mexico. So you can imagine what our population is and what their priorities are. And we had a mayoral candidate run. We had an incumbent mayor who was pro-free market, pro-business, was doing great things for the area. I'm not involved in local politics, I do national. But I watched this, and this guy who was literally, my friends, a surfer dude, like literally, like the bleach blonde hair and the tan, and his campaign posters were all about him being a surfer dude. That's a great reason to run. Came out of nowhere, and I looked at his financing, and it was all out of New York and DC, and I got immediately very suspicious. He was talking the right talk, like for industry and things like that, but immediately I noticed that he wanted to unionize the hotel that just went in right there in our little beach village, which all of our businesses are very dependent on. Our mayor, who was the free market pro-business guy, won handily in the election. And then, as the whatever votes that came out of vapor, I don't really know where they came from, out of somebody's crystal ball somewhere, our mayor, who was pro-free market, lost to the tan guy in swim trunks on the surfboard who was funded by New York and DC. So my question to you, I'm so fascinated and simultaneously horrified how the left manages to infiltrate us on the most local of levels. This was a mayoral race.
Sure,
Who
and
even
that's how
knows
it
we
works.
exist? We're in the middle of nowhere.
Sure.
And yet, this guy comes in and wins, and he's obviously a puppet for what's going on in all of D.C. and New York. And anyway, and of course, things have gone steadily downhill since then. So my question to you, very purposefully, I go in and no one speaks English in my polling place, first of all. And the ballots aren't in English because we're not really in America. We're in Tijuana North, pretty much. And so my question to you is, for these areas that are being swallowed up by the extremists, who are the real radicals, what can we really do? I didn't have answers for my conservative friends there, and I feel like I usually do. So this is where I feel like your expertise is really valuable.
Well, there are no easy answers. You know, I think part of the challenge in the message of True the Vote is there's no quick fix. You know, we live in a culture of convenience where I want it now. I mean, I want to be a one-click shopper and fix the election system, and that's not how it works. In instances like that, again, I always go back to what I fundamentally know to be true, and I suspect that everyone in this room at their core probably believes pretty much the same thing. Liberty's carved on our hearts. That's who we are. That is our birthright. What the radical elements that are coming into your town are doing is taking that away. And the challenge then is to communicate that to the people that would go and vote for them because he's the cool surfer dude, or because of, who knows what's being promised or threatened. We've seen a lot of border communities where there are just as many threats as there are promises. So, although every situation is different, my first and always reaction is it's through citizen engagement. If you're talking to your friends about it, form a strategy. Follow the money, first of all. Where are they putting it? Where are they going? What people groups are they talking to? And counter. Counter until you're no longer on defense and you're on offense. Because something that was said in the room earlier tonight is absolutely true. The one thing that the progressive left never counts on is that liberty will stand up. They fold. Because we have the winning message. The difficulty is that we just talk about that message in our little echo chamber, and we say, can you believe this is happening? That surfer guy is going to win, and they're going to keep recounting those ballots, and they're not going to check our ID, and we're appalled. But we think somehow our culture is going to correct itself because it should know better. It doesn't. It doesn't. It won't stop. And so it's not the perfect solution, but it is, you have to choose in and say, you know what? I don't know the full playbook on this one, but I know that I've got to engage, and so I'm going to break this down to its lowest common denominators, and I'm going to start following the money, and I'm going to start seeing, there's enough on social networks now to track where are they registering voters, what kind of materials are being put out. Where does your community gather? Where you can grab past exit polls and see returns and see where your most active polling places were. What demographics typically show up? Just deconstruct it and then rebuild it in the image of liberty and take it, and it works.
I think we have time for one last question here.
Catherine, I just wonder if you have an opinion about this. It seems to me that if you believe mainstream media, it seems like there's this huge group of Democrats, a huge group of liberals, and of course that's the vision they want you to see. What I'm wondering is, other liberals see what they do to conservatives. So I'm wondering, there probably are a lot of liberals out there who maybe don't really succumb to that party, but they're not strong enough to step out and go to a different party. And I'm wondering if you see that, and maybe we're just looking at a way to do some converting for those who really don't want to be there and they're not quite sure they're in a stronger party that would push back. They don't want to be part of the
Right.
you know, getting the backflack.
Right. Well, that's an astute observation, and that is a big problem. I think that there are a lot of people in this country that don't identify. They maybe have voted Democrat all their lives, and they no longer now identify, but they don't know what they identify with because the message of the other party is something they can't relate to. I think we also, it's just sort of man's tendency, we want to find, C.S. Lewis said every man has a God-sized hole in their hearts, right? We want to find the guy. Who's the guy? And I say guy, with all due respect, ladies, I just mean who's running for president that's going to solve it all? Guy or girl? I submit that the message now has to be vote your values. Really understand who's on the ballot, as murky as that can sometimes be, but don't label yourself anymore. Because I think more people will end up in a conservative camp, but the conversion has to happen, if it's going to really happen, if for a true conversion to happen, right, it's got to happen based on a fundamental transformation inside a person to say, even though I voted Democrat all my life, if this is the example, the values just aren't there to support it. It's not about flipping to the other party necessarily. It's making a personal choice. And so in that instance, then I think that sort of the evangelism of the pro-liberty movement has to be one of kindness and acceptance, and just, it's not, you can't be that, you got to be this. It's think about why you're that and then be who you are, Because we're a lot more alike than we are different, and we have to be willing to have those conversations and then let them decide. And when they decide, that's how you change the culture of the country, because it's been their decision. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's maybe a psychobabbly kind of way to say it, but we're so quick to say, if you're not blue, you got to be red, and if you're not, that's not it. We're Americans. What do we believe in? What do we jointly believe in? Go from that. Go from that and then find your place. We want our kids to dream dreams. We want to have hope. The gang that's up in the White House now is robbing that of everybody. Doesn't matter if you're in a blue state or a red state. This is so far beyond Republican and Democrat. And we just have to be bold enough to call it out, and then let the chips fall where they may, because I believe they will fall on our side. We just have to be willing to have the conversation. And there are, even though if you read the headlines and you listen to the news, you wouldn't necessarily think it. But more and more people are tuning those things out because they can no longer identify with them. And we're building a counterculture. And the counterculture is what's happening around the dinner tables. Politics is local. It's what's happening in our communities as we're talking to one another saying something is really wrong. And I can't put my finger on it, and I'm not much about politics, but man, the government's like everywhere. I just want them to leave me alone. And all of a sudden, you have a conversation going. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
First of all, thanks for what you're doing. I didn't know who you were even sitting here, so that's you said that you were worried about the electronic month of voting that's coming through the internet, presumably. Does it worry you that the government is trying to take over parts of the internet and regulate it? Right now, I think there's some bills on that. Secondly, Eric Holder, I heard today on the radio, I don't know if it's an old tape or a new one, the thing that makes his blood boil is voter ID drives.
Sure.
Last, I guess, Samsung warns us that our appliances are listening to us, and only ethics and laws keep them from using that information when we don't know it's listening. Our voice control TVs and radios and cars. And last, they took over some cars through the tire valve sensors. The pressure sensors took over automobiles. In the cyber war, people did it. Do you know of any group trying to protect our voting systems on the internet with cyber war type technicians? Because that's, I think, going to be the gunfight, and we're going to have a knife fight going.
I'll tell you something. This is a curious one. Many people who I represent, who I respect a great deal, are pro online everything. And their attitude is, well, it's better than paper. Time does not permit tonight, but I'll try to make it fast. The truth behind what's happening online is that the same brain trust that would be running our elections is the same brain trust that launched the Obamacare website, right? The truth behind the Obamacare website is that I think if we were all put to the test and forced to tell the truth, I think we would learn that wasn't in fact wholly an accident. They needed a little bit of a smokescreen to buy some time. When you really pull back on what happened with Obamacare and now what's in the process of happening with immigration, you will notice a pattern. States are given infusions of cash that they don't turn down because it's just kind of free money linked to various things that seem to be harmless enough. But they come with the strings of building in pipes that allow their databases, their state databases, to connect to the federal. So what you have in the case of Obamacare is when if you all remember the season of the navigators and how the navigators were going to go out and sign everybody up, we came across a paper written by a group called Demos. The headline of the research paper was "How to Register 68 Million New Voters Through the Affordable Care Act." Okay, here's how you do that. In every Obamacare application, there's a voter registration application. Why does all the digital mumbo-jumbo matter? Because when the states were taking that money and building those hooks that they didn't realize where it was headed, now can see, and sadly not necessarily, some of them still don't see, that they have created kind of a superhighway of data that they can't stop. Just like if you lose the eye-to-eye contact at the polls, you're not going to get it back. If you go all online, you're not gonna reel it back. One of the most elegant and beautiful and I think secure voting systems I have seen is in Mexico. I went to Mexico City a couple years ago when I got sick and tired of being told that the emergent Latin communities don't want photo voter identification. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, we're one of the last industrialized countries in the world that doesn't have photo voter identification. Seeing how they run their process in Mexico is all paper, but the paper is encrypted like our money is. They train, they through a lottery system, choose poll workers. They choose 3 million poll workers, and they train 1 million out of the citizenry to work. It's just the rite of passage. You work at the polls. They have Lucite, so completely see-through boxes. They have 12 judges there. All the judges sign off. It is an I've used the term so many times tonight, but it's an all hands on deck moment in Mexico. Why? Because not too many years ago in their presidential election, they were watching the returns come in and the computer glitched, and all of a sudden one of the candidates had no votes. And what the people of Mexico did is said, not on our watch, not again. And they developed a standalone institution that reformed the entire process. I shudder to think, given where we are in this country, what our response would be, other than just mutiny, riots in the streets. Would we have the composure to rise up and say, that doesn't work, but here's what will, and engineer a whole new system? I am very concerned about the many, many ways that we now know we are being monitored. Privacy is an illusion, and you got to get that through your head too. Privacy is an illusion. It's not real. But what is real are these conversations that we're having right now about what to do when. And if when comes, having the courage to stand up and take that next step to lead us to the place that we've got to go next. This is just a stopping point for where we're headed. we've got to be willing to go into that next, new frontier. And it's on your watch, and I'm glad to help. Thanks very much.
What a great lady, Catherine, and what a wonderful thing you're doing for our country with True the Vote. It's a terrific talk. I know there's people in here that haven't done polls before, and they're going to start to do it now. So thank you so much for coming up from Texas and sharing a little about what you've been doing. Well, we're coming to the end of a great day here. We will be seeing the students tomorrow. Camille, what room will we meet at 8:30 for breakfast with the students? Where we had the reception last night, off of the bar, down on the first floor. That'll be at 8:30. I want to remind you, if you haven't, to please fill out your surveys. We really do count on your feedback on that. The students, you can do it tomorrow, but the rest of you all, and if you don't have them and you have to send them in, okay, but we'd love to have them. Remind you, 2 people at every table could take the vases because the staff's flying back to Virginia and we can't take them with us. And I want to thank all of you for coming. Special thanks to our speakers, our introducers, and our staff. It's been a treat for us to be in Minnesota with so many good conservatives. I hope you'll keep in touch with us. I hope you'll go to our website. It's undergoing a massive renovation, and we're going to alert you when that's done. And I hope that you'll put cblpi.org on your list of favorites, because I think you're going to love the new website. I want to thank you all for your support and your friendship. I want to wish you safe travel home, and may God bless you all. Thank you.